Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the session presented by the Global ABC Adaptation Working Group entitled Adaptation is Everyone's Business. Thank you to those of you joining us in the room and those of you joining us online or watching the recording. This is a really interesting and exciting session because we'll be doing a lot of active work. We won't have you just listen to people speaking for a long time. We want audience participation, and we'll have a call to action and an opportunity to get engaged. My name is Judy Zakreski, and I am the co-chair of the Global ABC Adaptation Hub that has been doing the work to produce the work that we're doing on adaptation. Let me see if I can, sorry to reconfigure here, but I have to be able to see what I'm talking about. So the Adaptation Hub is really focused on producing knowledge. We issued a foundational call to action at COP26 that included a manifesto, which were the 10 principles for effective action. And based on those 10 principles for adaptation and resilience, we've taken on the production of case studies that reflect the resilience to various natural hazards. All of those are available for free on the Global ABC website. The work that the Adaptation Hub is doing in promoting resilience and adaptation is an integral part, or we're promoting adaptation and resilience as an integral part of all agreements. So not only are we producing knowledge, but we're now engaged in advocacy also. And we're making sure that we can tie in with a lot of the international agreements that have to do with the resilience and mitigation in the built environment that is so important in the fight against climate change. As we all know, about 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions are from the buildings and construction sector. And so we were involved in the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough last year at COP28 and global climate talks. Earlier this year in March, we released a study called "Why Are We Not Adapting?" And this is an exploration. It was originally started as a study of various tools and measurable projects that could be done to enhance adaptation and to give countries and jurisdictions, governments, and various players in the buildings and construction value chain something to work with, tools that could be measurable, that could lead to more adaptation in the built environment. But as we started the work, we were realizing that there was not really a collective movement. As our next step in this work is to sort of lean into this fragmentation of the value chain, accept it, break it up into the various stakeholder groups, and allow each stakeholder group to focus on actions that they themselves can control, realizing there's not one stakeholder group that can control all of the adaptation action within the whole value chain, and instead focus on what aspects of adaptation each stakeholder group can impact, and then focus in on that stakeholder group, each of them independently, to focus on the adaptation actions that they can control and get them to prioritize and to come up with solutions, as well as looking at the interoperability, interaction between the various stakeholder groups to make sure that the correct actions are prioritized so that they can unlock opportunities for other stakeholder groups to take action for adaptation. So despite the fragmentation by stakeholder group, we do need to recognize that we don't operate in vacuums. So we want to align with the other frameworks to enable action by the stakeholder groups to actually achieve the goals of the Buildings Breakthrough and the Chaillot Declaration. So what we're going to do today is, in an interactive fashion, we're going to invite we've done some work on some of the pathways, and so we've got the leaders of some of the groups that have done the work to introduce a little bit of the priority actions that have been identified to demonstrate what the prerequisites are and then to identify the next steps. And hopefully this will make it a little bit clear to everyone what kind of work we're doing and how it will all come together and what work remains to be done. So we have 4 stakeholder groups represented here today. And we want the audience today to bear in mind that there are connections between the various pathways. You may hear some goals, some actions repeated, but that's good. If they do repeat, then that tells us that if stakeholder groups are all focusing on a key action, then maybe that's an action that needs to be prioritized by the overall industry. And so once each stakeholder group kind of conducts their own work, and we start to bring these together, that will help us to identify the overall priorities for the buildings and construction value chain, for the prerequisites, as well as for unlocking the next set of actions. So with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone to 4 of my colleagues in turn. The stakeholder groups that are represented in today's session are national governments, and Liz Beardsley from the U.S. Green Building Council was one of the leading members of that subgroup. She's going to introduce the actions for the national governments to take. The finance and insurance sector, Karim Selouan from the French Development Agency will be introducing that pathway. Following Karim, we will have Andrew Minson, who is from the Global Cement and Concrete Association, and Andrew will be talking about the designers, engineers and architects. And finally, we'll have Julie Kestrup from Velux to be talking to introduce the pathway that's just beginning for the materials manufacturers. And so I want everyone to understand that this is an evolving process. It's very much work in progress. And I hope that those of you here and online will get excited about the work that's been done and think about joining us. So as you're listening to the presenters, think about whether the actions that they've identified resonate with you, whether you are a member of that stakeholder group or a different stakeholder group or an external interested party that maybe has ideas about whether or not these actions and pathways make sense, because we are looking for input, we're looking for feedback, we're looking for engagement. And if your stakeholder group is not mentioned in these 4 groups that are presenting today, we still need you, because we have 6 other stakeholder groups that we're putting together that need to do similar work to the groups that you'll hear from today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Liz Beardsley to talk first about the National Government Stakeholder Group.
Thank you so much, Judy, and welcome everyone. Actually, I want to start with just a personal reflection. So my first COP was Paris, and I thought I was a good luck charm, but somehow here we are, and we have not made the progress that we know we need to make. So, but that was also the first COP that had a Buildings Day, and the following years, the couple years since then, there really was still like kind of a scarcity of attention to the role that the building industry and buildings play in emissions, as well as both their impact on emissions, of course, through like heating, cooling, electrical use, materials, has even more recently being addressed or recognized, but also the impact of changing climate on buildings and their vulnerability. And I feel like now, just in the past couple of years, we're finally getting broader recognition across the COP and from governments on the criticality of incorporating buildings into their strategies, both for mitigation and adaptation. And just to like put a finer point on some of Judy's remarks, what we really need to do now is make it so that as national governments, subnational governments, private sector, as they are taking action on buildings, that it is incorporating mitigation and adaptation together, and that we can't do it. No, what's that? I don't need it. It's fine. Yeah, I'm just sorry. That it really every project, every program is an opportunity to address these together. We can't wait and have adaptation be an add-on later on, right? We've got to get it right from the beginning. Every retrofit, every new construction is an opportunity to do that. So that's what we're trying to do here in this program, this Adaptation Hub. And I just want to thank Victor and Judy for their leadership in this program. So as Judy explained, we have been working on different stakeholder groups and trying to basically do a crowdsourcing of good ideas and practical solutions on how we take this forward in a meaningful and impactful way. And this is kind of where we are at this point in time, really focusing on 4 actions that national governments can take. First off, to have national adaptation plans and roadmaps that consider critical infrastructure, as well as all buildings and all infrastructure, but with a special focus on things like emergency operations center, hospitals, and so on. So that's something that we have. Certainly some national governments have created those adaptation plans. In the United States, we have an example of one, and I think there's a real openness in some of the national governments to share and provide technical consultation and provide examples of what they're doing to support other governments in developing these adaptation plans. So that's really a core area that national governments can take action on now, and ideally would be doing their own stakeholder process as well to incorporate subnational and private sector into the thinking about what a national adaptation plan needs to consider itself. So that's one main action. Secondly, national governments own a lot of buildings, so they can show that leadership by incorporating resilience and adaptation into government buildings. And that has so many benefits. First of all, it helps protect the ongoing operations of the national government in times of stress and disasters. But it also, by taking on those improvements and those features, that shows, because federal national buildings are across a country. They're in rural areas, they're in urban areas, to really touch everyone's life. So it helps sort of spread and disseminate these best practices across the country. It helps train the local workforce on how to do these things and these best practices and what's possible, and to help provide support for the market for resilience and adaptation products. So that's critical, and that can be done through different measures depending on the country, whether it's a law or regulation or an executive order or just a policy that's in the development or construction agency, depending on the different national government, how they're structured. So that's something, again, where we have examples that can be used. And then thirdly, kind of providing for improved resilience for new construction through codes and standards, and work by our international and U.S.-based codes and standards organizations are really developing these resilient codes that can be used, and are also there's interesting work going on adapting these for use in different countries, because codes have to be usable. There has to be capacity to implement them, and that might mean tailoring for different situations. So that's another area that's critical for national governments to be leaders on, and depending again on the national government, it could be nationally adopted or national government in creating opportunities for subnationals to adopt those. And then fourthly, where the government is funding buildings and construction to leverage that money to provide for adaptation best practices, both for new construction and retrofits, to be incorporated. And again, every time like you touch a building, that's an opportunity to increase the resilience, and it just takes intent and data and sort of knowledge and capacity on all of the best practices that are currently available. So those are the main select actions that we are focusing on. Oops, did I do it? Okay. Then we also looked at some of the prerequisites to support these actions. And I'll just go through these quickly. So one is certainly like that data piece. So understanding what is the climate scenario that we should be looking at in terms of what is a future-proof or a more future-proof building. What does adaptation look like in a given country or region of a country? So there's a data need there, and kind of understanding what's the reference. So those are kind of the first two. And then also having that national, local connection, and that's going to be really at the practitioner level and the technical level. So connecting the dots between what the national government's doing and who's working on the ground to actually implement these best practices, and making sure it's a two-way street, right? It's collaboration on what the capacity is, what can be implemented, what are people seeing, and so making sure that's baked into those national plans, codes and standards, and directives. And then funding and resources also critical to enable all of these activities at the national level, but also implementing them at the subnational level. And then lastly, looking at national government's policy framework to see where there's more that can be done to adjust for climate conditions in the future, and build that in so that we're not having this like add-on idea of adaptation, but it's baked in from the beginning. So I think that I'm going to keep saying that, because that's really what we've got to like change the mindset and like systematically go through and see where those opportunities are and make those changes now. So sort of the next steps then for a national government and for policymakers are what's here in the orange. So once you have some of these initial actions taken, then there can be development of a national implementation plan with more localized options, integrating local building techniques into the national standards, ensuring the public buildings are available and part of kind of a network for disaster response and preparedness, public safety, creating a demand for resilient and beyond code building systems like LEED, EDGE, and others, and creating a financing ecosystem where if you go to get a mortgage or a business loan, the lending agency, the financial institution, is prompting the building owner to invest in adaptation and resilience to create that, again, from every time you're spending money on a building is the time to make it better. So that's an overview of what we've kind of been doing through this process for the national government stakeholder group. And it is, as Judy said, the idea is to have a big tent, and we welcome anyone with ideas to join us and help refine this and bring it forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I'm now going to turn the mic over to, I think our tech wizards are, there he is. Bonjour, Karim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Do you hear me?
I do. And
okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, because now I will jump into the financial insurance group that we have, and to present you, to introduce you what we have done during 1 year, notably also after the Déclaration de Chaillot. Well, As you know, the building sector stakeholders, public and private sectors, need to coordinate and pool their expertise and resources to develop innovative solutions dedicated to resilience and adaptation, notably in finance and insurance mechanism. That's why, for example, a building is mostly a private investment. They all depend your geographical area. However, while government establish an enabling regulatory framework and rely on enabling the power of the public procurement to trigger change and lead the market transformation, increase the dialogue between all building value chain actors is required. Finance and insurance actors like investment bank, private bank, rating agency, and insurer play a key role in leading market transformation by requiring all new and refurbishing, rebuilding to comply and align with climate change adaptation criteria and targets. That's why, for example, we try to connect what we want to propose in this group, notably with the principle number 9, dedicated to finance and insurance in the 10 principle. And now, could you, for the next slide, please? Here, perfect. And yes. And for in this group, we have selected 5 key action: progressively reduce financing and no adapted or high-risk projects. Second pillar action that we want to propose is to integrate risk assessment and the hazard exposure analysis in the insurance underwriting. The third pillar is the facilitate financing mechanism to encourage adaptation investment, notably for the global south. The fourth pillar is to collaborate with the government and the local stakeholders for the community-specific solution. The question is, if we see just the previous group concerning the national and the local administration, the question is how we could match the division and all the level of the national local administration and the specificity of the specific financial and insurance mechanism to be adapted with each level of administration, for example. And the last action that we want to propose is to embedded adaptation and mitigation standards into corporate responsibilities policy. But to achieve these goals, we want to have some prerequisites and notably to establish for the next step. Next slide, please. In fact, if you want to achieve this action, it's very important to have some inputs. But which inputs? 3 prerequisites to achieve this selected action. For example, to ensure compliance with the climate mitigation and adaptation screening standards. For example, we could see the use case of the taxonomy. It's one example to see how we could match the climate mitigation action and the adaptation. This is what we want to propose, and this is what was written in the 10 principle to make in tandem adaptation and mitigation. The second prerequisite that we want to propose, notably to integrate the risk assessment and progressively to reduce the financial for the non-adapted or the high-risk project. This is the development of and maintenance of high quality for the future oriented climate and hazard data at the local scale. We are absolutely aligned with the 10 principle. And the third prerequisite is also to propose some devolution of power and resources to the local governments, notably to accelerate the collaboration with the governments and the local stakeholders for the community-specific solution. Next slide, please. And now why we want to integrate for the input these prerequisites, also to achieve the objective of the selected action is notably to determine next steps. How we could present these next steps into 3 parts. First of all, to develop the development of the taxonomy for the green investments in the tandem adaptation and mitigation, but also, for example, to promote some nature-based solution to reduce the climate risk, for example. The second action that we want to promote for the next steps is also to create a centralized climate data, and the risk assessment platform, notably so to have a very free access of the qualified data to help all the value chain of the building sector, all the value chain of the stakeholders, for the engineering sector, for the architects, for the policymaker, etc., to have the same level of information concerning data to be aligned with the needs of the insurance of or the financial institution. And the last next steps for us is also to finance the warning system, the near warning system, to have the lot of investment for notably the prevention, how to accompany, to support the local community, all the administration to have an access of the system to protect the population and to protect also the assets and the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim. Andrew Minson is going to walk us through the designers and the designers group, architects and engineers.
Judy, great. Thank you very much. So just for those who are just joining a little bit late, there's a QR code in the top right of all these slides, and we've already thanked Victor. I'm sure we'll thank Victor again for doing all the great work in the background here. Well, actually also a lot of foreground work. Go to that link and you'll get all the details behind what we're talking about. Where's the clicker? So this is for architects and engineers. So I'm from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. I'm a structural engineer, worked on real projects for 10 years and remain very engaged with this community. So it was part of the team to bring this draft together. Just to emphasize, it's a draft. We're really keen to have inputs. What I love about this whole framework that Judy and Victor and others have come up with is that it's trying to focus on what you can do in your lane. We talk about staying in your lane, but with an awareness that actually we do need to collaborate across and outside of our lane. But let's not to get too distracted early on by what's outside our lane and focus what we can do. So for example, architects and engineers are part of project teams, design teams, sometimes hopefully with a contractor involved. And we know that in terms of mitigation, the biggest impacts we can have on carbon reduction is decisions early on. It's absolutely true for resilience as well. So early stage alignment of what the architecture and the engineering design is really important. So if we can have that action on every project, that'd be great. And I'm sure there are people who are part of engineering and architecture teams now who are saying, well, we know that. Well, sometimes some of these actions are obvious, but we need to write them down. We need to have the capacity building. I mean, I will probably keep on relaying back to CO2, but we're talking about resilience, but in terms of CO2, we talk about capacity building and CO2 literacy. We need to have the same literacy in terms of adaptation and specialized resilience training. We've heard from Liz about going beyond code. Sometimes it's beyond the normal delivery that we're going. We might think that our design teams know about resilience, but do they really know about resilience? There's a capacity building required. Thirdly, sometimes, and this is slightly outside of lane, sometimes we might point to the client and say, well, if the client would only prioritize resilience, then we could as a design team. And I think that too early on, too quickly absolves the designer of responsibility. If you think that that's the case, well, look inside you first and say, well, hang on, maybe it's my responsibility to present that need for resilience to the client. Maybe you're an early adopter and you're more aware of the need for resilience than that client. Maybe that client is only doing one building project in their whole career. You need to educate them. So that's an action for us to do that education process. And we can learn a lot from passive solutions. We can learn a lot from vernacular design. If we rely on active solutions, actually at the point of disaster, post-disaster, they are more likely to be broken. So passive design has a really important role to play. So these are 4 actions. If you think we've missed any, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. So some of these have, well, all of them have a prerequisite, I think. We might not have it all in this summary table. Where are we? There we are. So if I just go down on my own slides here. In terms of prerequisites, Well, we know that combine the architecture and the engineering work together early on. Actually, probably we need our client to pay a bit more for that, or to give us the time to do it, or to do earlier appointment. Sometimes the architect's appointed early, no one else is appointed. Some decisions have been baked into the design. Then the engineer comes along. It might be the engineer responsible for the heating and cooling of the building who comes in and says, well, actually, if only you had done this a different way, I'd be able to deliver some more resilience here against the high temperature heat waves that are really adverse to well-being and health. So you might need to have structured budget allocation early on to get the design team together to make those key decisions. Let's just go down a bit further on. We talked about capacity building. Well, if we look at the fourth one down, we might need to have training modules and cross-disciplinary education. Now, I think that one, that might be out of your responsibility as a designer working for a design company, but it's actually within the remit of your professional association that you're involved with. I don't think the professions really should be looking much outside themselves to say, well, actually, we are responsible for what we as a profession are doing. We're responsible for the training of our profession, and therefore developing these tools are important. We've emphasized the cross-disciplinary nature of the action, the top middle one, and therefore we want to have cross-disciplinary education as well. And you can see we've just, at the bottom, we've just pulled in this collaborative work on development of vernacular and passive design standards so that we can then implement that action in the middle bottom of that slide. So let's go to a few next steps. I'm probably slightly running out of time because we've got lots to cover. And just in terms of the right case studies, obviously always really useful to transfer that learning. We've got something here about financing and risk. We've got something about financing and risk here as well. And I think that's important for the client. For the client to elevate resilience, there's their motivation for that. There can be different motivations that you might want to draw on in different countries and regions. It might be purely from an environmental perspective, ESG. It may be purely from the financial side. And therefore financing insurance schemes may well play a role in that. And then right down the bottom on this passive design theme across the bottom of the slide, incorporating, actually doing it, actually implementing it in terms of vernacular building techniques and local materials to deliver that resilience. And with that, I'll move on. I'll hand over to our final speaker, Julie.
Thank you, everyone. I think it's certainly true that there's a lot of overlap between the different strands, because pretty much everything I've heard from my colleagues and the other three work streams also applies to the work that we're doing in materials and systems manufacturers. As I said up front, we are early on in our work on this particular pathway. So what you'll see today is also not the result of so many people's thinking, which makes it even more important that more people participate in this discussion. Now, I think our first speaker spoke about the fact that buildings have been sort of sidelined, in the international sort of climate conversation for quite a while. I think that's still the case to some extent. And I think, what we do is even sidelined within our own field. I can't sort of help but noticing that I'm standing just in front of a sign here that says that only 4% of global building investment was focused on green and energy efficient buildings in 2023. So that's within our own sector. And this is talking about green and energy efficient, and what we're talking about here, of course, is something broader than that, on adaptation and resilience. But it just goes to underline that even within our own sector, there's still quite a lot of work to do in terms of getting people on board with what we do. So moving on to the, am I clicking myself? There we go, I am. So in our work group, we found 4 sort of key issues. There are many more, of course, but these are the ones we chose to focus on. The first one we called Promote System Integration of Technical Solutions. And it could also be called Promote System Integration of Solutions, because very often when it comes to the built environment, we actually do have the solutions out there. What we're not good enough is thinking them together so that when we build or renovate a building, we make sure that we get all the bang for the buck across all the metrics. So that's in energy, it's in environment, it's in climate, it's in well-being and health, and it's also on resilience and adaptation. So that's super, super important. And this doesn't necessarily sit well with the typical policy framework, because typically, of course, policy sits in one sort of policy bucket, and we need to do way more work to make sure we integrate that, and that's also why platforms like this is very important. The second the point we put up here is about providing technical support for existing at-risk homes. And again, I think you can say, take out the existing and say at-risk homes, because frankly, with the way the weather patterns are going, most of us will be at risk of something in the years to come. And this ties very closely with the fourth point here on map material and systems used in relation to location, because of course, the solution and the issues are not the same. Just before coming here, I ended up having coffee with a sort of a Brazilian youth activist, and she was from the south of Brazil. And she was quite frustrated because when you think about Brazil and biosphere, you think Amazonas. And that's all good and well, but she's from the south of the country. Down there, they have a very different biosphere and therefore some very different issues and therefore some very different solutions. And it just really underlined to me this point of making sure that we're talking into the local and regional context, right? Because that context will shape the solutions that are needed. And the context is weather, it's climate, but it's also building styles, building codes, and so on and so forth. The fourth point we put on here is about designing products for repair, reconstruction, and deconstruction, because the way it works today for most materials and systems is that while the individual parts can be recycled, they are not necessarily being recycled. When it comes to building waste, I mean, from my own experience at Velux and the projects we've done, it is not attractive today for someone who's demolished a building, say, to actually discard that material in a way that makes sense environmentally. In fact, there's an extra cost added to that, and that is unattractive. If they do it, the value of material is also not necessarily substantial, because while the materials can be reused, they're not made for reuse. And so one of the things we're looking at Velux, and I know other companies in our sector as well, is how we can design the entire product for reuse, with reused materials to begin with. So we're pushing it down the value chain, saying how can we source materials that are already lower CO2, and part of that CO2, of course, will be based on them also existing of a certain percentage of reused materials. So that's a really important point, because it pushes through the whole value chain. If we need those materials, then we're pushing down the value chain a demand for those products. Yes, moving on to the nothing? Oh, am I going the wrong way? So I have many qualities, and being good with IT is not one of them. So the prerequisites for success are these ones, and I think there are many, but we listed 5. The first one, and I think almost all of you also talked about that, is this notion of building codes and standards for resilience. We need to agree on what it is we're doing. We need to agree on that so that we can have a uniform approach, and so that we can have data that ties in. We need to be able to quantify where we are and where we're going, and we need to agree on where we're going, because as a manufacturer as well, we can see a lot of sort of things being pushed at us as well. To trade with us, you need to live up to this standard. To trade with us, you need to live up to this standard. To trade with us, you also need to sign this pledge. And so the more we can be uniform in our approach to that, the better it is for all of us, because it facilitates the work and it makes sure we're all working to the same standards. The second point about the identifying at-risk homes and communities, I think sort of flows quite easily from what I mentioned before. We need to make sure we know who out there is at risk and what that risk is. And that's also where the subnational involvement is super important, because those are the people who are closest to the citizens and who know what the context is. The third point on renovation capabilities and creating incentives is particularly pertinent for Europe and the US, where the vast majority of the built environment now standing in 2050 is standing today, about 80%, whereas in the rest of the world, about 80% is still to be built. And it's very important for us to work from what we have today. The fourth point, and it comes back to what we talked about in the beginning, is to just create this overall awareness of our overall carbon footprint. Because as it stands today, and it pains me to say it, but after 15 years working on this topic, our presence here and our presence in the political discussion is in no way correspondent to our overall footprint in the sector. And the final point about promoting a future-oriented understanding of climate hazards, again, this is a very real issue as a manufacturer using various materials, because we certainly do live up to code today, but that code is irrelevant if the weather patterns go beyond. And so it's a really big task for all of us in predicting accurately where we're heading and what that will mean for our products and our materials from a resilience and adaptation perspective. And for instance, inclement weather, so it could be flooding, but for our products, for instance, stuff like hail, there were those big hailstorms last year in in Italy. And that just puts pressure on our products and our materials in a way we haven't seen before. And that's, of course, super important to add to the discussion. And then finally, on the next steps, and again, there are many, and we've sort of drawn it down to a few here. The first one, and it's a topic that we don't talk enough about, but it's really, really pertinent. It's about investing in education and professional training. Very often people think that we're only talking about the actual people on the roof who are installing the PV or the windows or something else. They are super important, and we lack them, especially in Europe, where many of them are retiring and they're not being replaced. But we're talking about people all the way through the value chain, because a lot of the people that we need out there who don't have today are the people who can draw our different sort of paths together in terms of creating a coherent framework, in terms of creating an integrated solution, in terms of drawing together the different business communities that we're talking to today. The second point is about promoting public awareness of resilience practices. I think many people, especially in Europe, are just not sufficiently aware of the situation they're in today, and therefore it's not something that really enters their minds. If you look at what happened in Spain recently after the big floodings down there was a public outcry because basically there was no on-time alert to the public about what was coming up, and at the same time people are not used to these sort of disasters, and so they don't invest against them. The third point here is about developing standards for raw secondary materials. This is a really important issue because basically as it stands today, while we're being encouraged to reuse materials and also products, there is no framework around that. So for instance, if we were to sell, let's say, a 10-year-old Velux window, that would have a slightly lower performance than a new window, but still be substantially better than a 25-year-old window or no window. But there is no one who guarantees the performance of that product. So who is a liability then for a secondary material like that? Is it ours? Is it the person who installs it? Is it somewhere else in the value chain? And those are really important questions, because if we can't ascertain the value of the secondary raw material and ensure it, then no one will take it on. And that goes for the windows, goes for everything else as well. The fourth point is about implementing incentives for recycling and proper material disposals. And again, I already talked a little about it. If it's not financially interesting to do the right thing, then sadly most people won't. So it's really important to create a system whereby you're not punished for wanting to do the right thing, but punished for wanting to do the wrong thing. There's a lot of talk about sort of green premium, and clearly that should be a grey premium, right? I mean, doing the green thing should be the average, and doing the grey should be the below. Two final things here. One about leveraging local expertise and knowledge. And again, this is why I think many of us are at COP, because this is really a chance to talk to people from all over, find out what we have in common, find out how we can leverage our respective knowledge and share that. And the final point on assessing and adapting to changing methods over time. And this is very difficult, of course, because, of course, standardization and regulation will typically be behind the reality. But with the sort of weather patterns we're seeing now, it's very important that we periodically update that data to know where we're heading and know that we are regulating and measuring against not what we would like us to be, but where we actually are. And with that, I'd love to hear the input from the audience.
All right. Thanks to all of our speakers. I think those presentations were really great, and they gave us an idea of what the working groups are doing and where we need to go next. I can't see this. You know what? Can I take a handheld? I need to be able to see what I'm talking about. So our panelists have highlighted the adaptation pathways that are currently in progress. That's the national governments, financial institutions, and insurance companies, designers, and materials and systems. And you can see, just listening to them, that there were a lot of overlapping ideas. Sort of reflecting on them as I was listening to everyone speak, there were a lot of commonalities. There's building codes that are forward-looking. That has an impact on all of these groups. Training and capacity building, both for the people involved in each of the industries as well as the people in each of these stakeholder groups doing their part to raise awareness. Incentives, those are just a few. And as everyone mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these pathways are still evolving, and we're really looking for community. So we have 6 additional pathways that we're building to address the other essential stakeholders. So the next step for this working group and the Adaptation Hub is to finish the 10 pathways. I don't have to read through them because they're on the screen there. But how are we going to do that? I think I should have another slide. All right, what I'm going to do right now is skip over these next 2 slides because we're going to move into an active session for people who are here in person. And I want to release the people who are joining us virtually and also to allow us to have a sort of a comprehensive recording that we're able to reuse. So I'm going to skip over the active session for right now. We're going to be doing a discussion with great breakout groups to come up with ideas for improving the existing pathways that are under development, as well as talk about the additional pathways that need to be developed. So that's just a heads up for those of you in the room. Please don't leave. Right. So the next thing that we're going to do coming out of COP and moving into the rest of the year, we're looking towards a global ABC General Assembly, probably in April, and then, of course, COP30. So we've got a couple of milestones to work towards. And our priority number 1 is to finish the 10 pathways. The way that we're going about this is for each stakeholder group to hold approximately 3 sessions. So the ones that the stakeholder groups that you heard from today have already held their first session. And those sessions are about 90 minutes long. A brainstorming session with people representing that industry sector from around the world. That will consist of basic brainstorming. After we've done that for all of the pathways, we're going to bring all of the groups together to identify the areas of overlap. So a little bit of what we're starting to see come out of these first 4 pathways today. Where are each pathway, each stakeholder group has identified like 4 or 5 priority actions, and as everyone mentioned, that's not the end of what needs to be done. But we're also trying to make this something that's doable, something that people in each stakeholder group can pick up and say, okay, I can't imagine, eating the whole elephant. Where are the first bites I need to take? And so what each of these working groups is designed to do is to say, okay, national government, here are 4 things that you need to be thinking about as a priority. And the same with all of the other stakeholder groups. But then we can even tailor that and focus that further when we can start to get all of the stakeholder groups together and say, and start to identify the areas of commonality and maybe, star 1 or 2 key actions for each stakeholder group that will unlock an action for another stakeholder group or that will help to advance the whole discussion on adaptation. So once we've done that, identifying the areas of overlap, drawing connections, and determining what is the most important, we'll go back to each stakeholder group and refine the priority actions. So, maybe moving from 5 or 4 to 1 or 2. So, for instance, in the materials group, they're looking at designing products for reconstruction and deconstruction. And then maybe the next step would be developing labels or a scheme or developing guidelines. And then each stakeholder group would develop or identify what they themselves need to sort of construct a very succinct set of pathways that will map everything for the whole buildings and construction value chain. And that's the idea of what we would like to deliver at COP30. So there's quite a bit of work to be done over the next year. However, we have a secret weapon who many of you have heard about and who I neglected to thank at the beginning of this session in Victor Pianet, who is the Secretariat of the Adaptation Hub. And Victor has done all of the heavy lifting and has made it very easy for people to participate in the work that we're doing. So really, we just need people to step up and have a commitment and an interest to be involved in the work that we're doing, and we'll make it very easy for you to do that. And by we, I mean Victor. He's been a real superstar, and he's put all of this together and will help us to sort of move this forward into what we need to do over the coming year and to a strong delivery. So we really do want partners and champions from multiple countries, from and from a broad range of stakeholder groups. We can make it very easy for you to get involved. But we do need people involved to help us understand the unique needs of each stakeholder group. We don't want to develop global recommendations with 20 people. We need a lot of people involved in this process so that we're making sure that we're not developing them in a vacuum and that they're globally applicable. So if you're interested in getting involved, which we hope you are, that might be the last slide. I'm going to pull up the QR code again. There is a if you go to this QR code, it will take you to the Global ABC Adaptation Hub homepage. You will be able to download or view all of the pathways that have been discussed here today. And you will also, if you scroll all the way down, you have Victor's email address that you can use to express your interest in getting involved. Those of you who are here today, please come up to any of us to express your interest. We'll be thrilled to get you involved. And with that, I'm going to adjourn the recording of this session, and we'll move into a working session for those of you who are in the room in person. So thank you to everyone who has participated in this session. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to Victor, who is watching us on the live stream. And thank you to all of you in the room who we hope will be working with us going forward. Thank you.